And a reminder to turn off any cell phones or other devices. Just take this chance to get settled in. My name is Ruth Dancer, and I'm the Anglican chaplain here at the University of Victoria. I'd like to introduce the MC for this event. Dr. Paul Bramadat is a professor and director. Thank you. The welcoming comes later, but that's great. I like your enthusiasm. So he's a professor and director of the Center for Studies in Religion and Society here on campus. The CSRS creates a space for scholars, students, religious insiders and outsiders, and all those interested in the many ways that religion and society interact. They host a range of special events, including the weekly lecture series on Thursday afternoons, and those are open to the public. I want to thank Paul so much for being the MC for this event. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for that very warm welcome. You were appreciated even before I did anything to deserve it. Thank you. Thanks also for being here rather than, I think there's a football game going on today. Lewis told me. Neither Lewis and I go to men's school, so we had to be told by people that there's a big football game on tonight. So thank you for being here with us. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of this event. It's both an honor and a privilege. And since we're speaking about privilege, and since we're going to be talking about religious and spiritual truths and issues of justice, integrity, and dignity, it's therefore fitting, I think, to begin by saying that we acknowledge with respect the Kwagan-speaking peoples on whose traditional territory the university stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Spanish people whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. I'm so pleased that it's increasingly obvious to so many of my friends at UVic and beyond that our Indigenous friends and neighbors are equal partners in any work we want to undertake in the endeavor to extend human rights here or abroad. There are so many reasons to despair for our common future right now in the world, and there are so many signs of hope as well. And so I think today is one of those signs of hope. Speaking of today, in honor of the United Nations World Interfaith Harmony Week and the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UVic Multi-Faith Services and the Victoria Multi-Faith Society are joining together today to present Creating Our Future, Visioning a Sustainable, Compassionate World. 70 years ago, the UN General Assembly, echoing the strongest values of our spiritual traditions, proclaimed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This groundbreaking document proclaims that the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. For all our amazing material progress, though, since that time of the Declaration in 1948, we've slid toward insularity, polarizing ideologies, and ecological crisis. Our increasing interconnectedness and the need to plan for the future are now forcing us to think about our own core values and beliefs. How can we go beyond the ancient prejudices of our past and the current distractions of consumerism to the sacred ground on which we all stand? How can the collective spiritual wisdom of the diverse peoples of the world assist us in building a sane, peaceful, compassionate world civilization? These are the questions that motivated this event, and those are the questions that will be guiding our conversation today. Thanks to the generous support of the University of Victoria and the volunteer services of the Victoria Multi-Faith Society and the UVic Office of Multi-Faith Services, this event has been organized as a service to the broader Victoria community. You'll find display tables for the two co-sponsors just outside the auditorium doors, where you can sign up for other events if you want to be notified of other events that are also available for you to see everybody. The Victoria Multi-Faith Society, established in 2006, has a board that represents 9 communities: Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, First Nations, and Unitarian. Its mission is to learn from one another, to celebrate our unity and diversity, and to work together for the well-being of the community and the world. The UVic Office of Multi-Faith Services, established 40 years ago and essentially re-established just last week or a couple weeks ago, is a unit of student services that works closely with other service units to provide the best spiritual care for the campus community. nurturing the holistic well-being of students, staff, and faculty alike. And now I'd like to welcome Lisa Helps to open the event.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I too would like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional territories of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich people, and to thank them for allowing us to gather here. I'd also like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this event, but more importantly, I'd like to thank the organizers for convening this important event and this important conversation to mark this important historical moment. Not only the 70 years of the Declaration of Universal Rights and Freedoms, Human Rights and Freedoms, but also the crisis that we're in terms of human rights and community cohesion in this present moment. I will just say a few short words in order to kick off the event, and then I'm very much looking forward, like all of you, to learning from the various speakers who are here this evening, or this afternoon. I'd like to apologize in advance to the speakers in the second half of the event. I will be departing at the break. I'm going to Ottawa tomorrow morning and need to get organized. And I'll also apologize in advance to anyone who was at the mosque last weekend and heard some of the remarks that I'm going to share today. It's not going to be an exact repeat. Imam Ishmael invited me to speak at the mosque last Sunday when we were marking the one-year anniversary of the Quebec shootings. And so the remarks that I shared were inspired by the Imam's invitation, and I think worth sharing again today with a little bit of variation. So I'll do that, and then I'll get out of the way, and we'll hear from the wisdom of the group. I'd like to just share a story. Recently I was invited by the president of UVic, Jamie Castles, into his office with a couple of other mayors in the region, and he wanted to know from our perspective what were the biggest challenges facing us as a region. And probably he expected me to say something like housing affordability and transportation. But what I said instead is that I really do see one of the biggest challenges facing us as a region, and indeed as a global community, is a degraded space for civil public dialogue. That's and a corresponding crisis of truth. And this current historical moment is giving rise to things like heightened extremism, Islamophobia, racism, and these things get stronger when we can no longer talk with each other in a way that is there to build understanding, with the aim of building understanding. The public sphere for discourse and dialogue is really crowded with lots of messages and strong opinions, particularly on social media, and then these strong opinions come to masquerade quite quickly as the truth. People put their stake in the ground on Facebook or Twitter, and they stake a position, and then there's this echo chamber that happens, and we're all hearing and saying the same thing in our little Facebook silo, and then that becomes the truth somehow. And of course, this trend of Twitter truth, it's a hard one to say, this trend of Twitter truth, I think is best or worst exemplified by the US president, who seethes with intolerance and racism. And when these kinds of things held in that office, they become legitimate just by the very body who is spouting those things. And so we're in this space of a crisis of truth where the very possibility of sitting across from someone who's very different from us becomes harder and harder because of the state of the world in terms of how we talk with each other. So in this period, and this is part of what today's about, we need to do two important things. The first thing is we need to cut through all of the swirling messages, and we need to put a stake in the real ground, not the virtual ground, about what is true. So that's the first thing we need to do. And then the second thing is we need to engage each other in different kinds of conversations. So what is truth? I mean, I could give a whole list, but I thought it would be worth, since we're at this multi-faith gathering today, just reading briefly from the Book of Joy. It's a conversation convened between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And I would recommend it highly to all of you. It's called The Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World. And so this is one of the fundamental things that I think is true and that can guide us as we strive to create a civil society that is more whole and more connected. So Desmond Tutu says, we are wired to be, and he says, and I believe this to be a fundamental truth, he says, we are wired to be caring for the other and generous to one another. We shrivel when we are not able to interact. I mean, that is part of the reason why solitary confinement is such a horrendous punishment. We depend on the other in order for us to be fully who we are. I didn't know that I was going to come so soon to the concept that we have at home, the concept of Ubuntu. It says, a person is a person through other persons. Ubuntu says, when I have a small piece of bread, it is for my benefit if I share it with you. Because after all, none of us came into the world on our own. And you realize that in a very real sense, we are meant for complementarity. It is the nature of things. You don't have to be a believer in anything. I mean, I could not speak as I am speaking without having learned it from other human beings. I could not walk as a human being. I could not think as a human being, except through learning it from other human beings. I learned to be a human from other human beings. We belong in this delicate network. So if we take Archbishop Desmond Tutu's premise as true, that we already belong because we are human, then I think that is one truth that needs to shine through all of those messages and that will help us as we're trying to have more civic discussions and civil discussions with each other. And the second thing that we need to do, and this is part of what today is about, is we need to engage each other in a different kind of conversation, where the aim is truly to learn about the other, not simply to prove our own point, where we want to understand our shared humanity, our shared experiences of being human, but also our differences. So we must convene in ways and spaces just like today, where we allow people to show up thinking that they already know something, thinking that their mind is already made up, but to get new information through these conversations, and to be able to change their minds without feeling like somehow they've lost ground or given something up. And I really believe as human beings that we have the capacity to do this. This is what today's event is about, building understanding, sharing stories, and learning from each other. And it's by drawing on the similarities that connect us and the differences that make us rich and strong that we'll be able to recreate a space for civic public dialogue and shared truths, even in this era of swirling messages and the kinds of leadership we're seeing in other places in the world. So with that, I'll close my remarks. Happy to be here and so looking forward to the wisdom that the speakers are going to share with us. Thank you so much.
Wow. One of the best reasons to think about leaving Oak Bay and going to Victoria. I don't know how many other mayors of Canada cities you've heard, but seriously, it's pretty lucky. I get here as an interloper. So Tiffany Joseph is our first speaker. She'll be representing Indigenous spirituality. She's a Tsimshian language apprentice who teaches in Tsimshian immersion preschool. Her Sandwich and Squamish cultures provided the foundation for her understanding of what it means to be kind, open, understanding, and compassionate, and the importance of creating a world reflective of Indigenous values. Our second speaker in the Baha'i community will be Gita Dadian. Gita was born in Iran to a Baha'i family, raised in Canada, and has lived in South America, Europe, the Middle East, and the South Pacific. She is a member of the Baha'i Assembly of View Royal, the administrative body of one of the 13 Baha'i communities in the Victoria area. Gita has worked as a leadership consultant, executive coach, and university lecturer. The Buddhist panelist is Wayne Codling. He holds a BA in Buddhist Studies and is a lineage holder in the Soto Zen School, as founded by Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. A Zen monk for more than 30 decades, he has lived many years in the monastic communities of his lineage and currently teaches Zen meditation at various centers in the Victoria area. And finally, our Christian panelist, Anita Sarut, is the new rector of St. Mary of the Incarnation in the Chosen. Anita has worked in the Lutheran Church as a children's ministry coordinator, as well as a youth leader, and has served on the Anglican Council, Anglican Church of Canada and Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada's Joint Youth Ministry Committee. She earned her Master's of Divinity in May of 2017.
It's going to Hela, Tiffany Joseph, the Snap, just a lesson, Satan, GPS, Polish, Halistin at Stratus, Edelons, Halilasin, Kumoch, Tipokumia, Fiwanamat, the Nasila, Skuli Kolachas, Skananash, Lord Joseph, and myself, my name is Tiffany Joseph. I am Polish and Salish. The Polish people, our territory is Vancouver area and Squamish, BC, that's the anglicized way of saying Polish. So it includes north of Squamish, BC, includes Whistler, goes down to the Burrard Inlet. Our villages went. Sorry. Should I use that mic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. That way I can walk. Squamish territory includes north of Squamish, BC, goes down towards West Vancouver and along the Burrard Inlet towards North Vancouver. All our villages were along the Burrard Inlet and went up to Squamish as I described. My family comes from a village through one side of my Polish lineage in Gibson's Landing, so we even had a village on the Sunshine Coast. Salish territory includes the Salish Peninsula and comes towards Victoria, Bacalls. Eric Pelkey says Bacalls is a boundary marker between Salish and Lekwungen territories. But when it comes to these territories and boundaries, it's not a hard line as colonial maps would like to be, how our colonial mindset wants it to be. So, we want things to be concrete and straightforward, and we want to know where the line in the sand is, where this is mine and that's yours. But our territories are more overlapping. And to see ourselves and the way we see ourselves, I think we were nations. I am from the Salish nation, and my relatives in Lekwungen are from the Lekwungen nation and the Esquimalt nation, and so on. But these borders, these boundaries, they kind of were better understood if you look at the way we lived our lives, which was we were all families who had rights and responsibilities to uphold on the land. So there might be somebody who says this is Lekwungen territory, and they're so sure of it because their family says so. And then there might be somebody who's so sure that this is Salish territory, and they're so sure of it because their family said so. And so the way I had to make sense of all of this is realize that we had our own way, and then colonialism came and they said, we're going to make sense of it in our way, and I had to re-indigenize that. So the reason why our boundaries overlap is because families had different agreements amongst one another, and as long as we knew who we were, this is why I acknowledged my grandparents. I know who my grandparents are, and I know where I'm supposed to be based on my family. And that's all I need to know. And I might not know specifically the agreements between my grandparents and their friends, but their elders will know. So if I cross into somebody's territory that I was taught is my territory, that person who's not from my nation would know if I say, Tiffany Joseph, then it's net. Patrick and Anna Joseph, then Maini Tain, I Iwanamat, I Squichalajat, then Salsila. And then say, oh, okay, I know who you are. And we always ask that, who are you and where do you come from? So I'm going to talk to you not just about my family and where I come from, but I'm also going to talk about the things that my family have gone through, and that is also where I come from. And today we hear of things called like intergenerational trauma, and the thing that a lot of people want to like jump on top of that with is intergenerational strength and resiliency and healing and recovery, and like epigenetics. The understanding that we have that when my grandmother was carrying my mother inside her womb, my mother had me inside her mother's womb. So even though I wasn't at a lot of places, I was there. When my grandmother was the first Indigenous student at a non-Indian residential school, I was there. I have no idea. She didn't tell me anything about what she experienced being one of the first Indigenous students in a school that was for, I guess you could say, Canadians. But when she started, she was one of 8. By the time she graduated, she was the only one. And I know that she experienced ostracization, is that a word? By her own community, by her own family, by being basically the only one to be able to thrive in this academic type of schooling. I know my mother told me she was called things like apple, and apple's a slur of saying you're red on the outside, white on the inside. My mother... My mother experienced a lot of abuse and racism, abuse within her own family, and even internalized racism in her own family. To be Indigenous or Satanage in her own territory and have a father who could speak Sinchapin, a mother who could speak Hulkamina, because my grandmother that I just mentioned, she's from Duncan. So she's Coetson. So I didn't acknowledge that in terms of territory, but I don't know the Coetson boundaries territory. But anyway, I remember her telling me that she had this math teacher who was German, and he was like, "Why don't you speak your own language? You should learn your language." And that made her feel bad. I think he was coming from a place of like, you have a good culture, a rich culture. But the tone he was taking was shaming her, for one. And for two, who was she going to learn from when her father was punished for speaking his language? And having a mother to experience racism and alienation from her own people. And then even before, for my great-grandparents' generation, my great-grandfather was Andy Paul, and he was born in 1892. He was there in Sanok, which is Kitsilano area in Vancouver, and he was there when they were putting our people on barges and saying, "You need to leave here." So if you know anything about Kitsilano, it's an affluent area of Vancouver, and they didn't want Indians there because they wanted to make that place for rich white people, basically. So they kicked us out of there, sent us on barges, and they said you can go to, basically they're like, whatever village you get to of yours, that's where you're going to be. And then comes me. And I knew a lot of this stuff before the age of 10. So imagine me growing up and looking around in this whole room. How many Indigenous people do you see? You know, and this is not uncommon for me. You know, I knew that no matter where I would go in my life, I would probably be one of a few, if not the only Indigenous person in the room. And realistically, I was experiencing the world like anyone in this room could want to kill me, because that's the reality of what we experienced on our land and in our territory. People didn't want me to learn to speak my language. People didn't want me to learn how to learn my culture. And people wanted me to just give it up, you know. There's even our own people say, what's the point in learning our language? What's the point in learning our culture? It's old and it's, you know, we don't need it anymore. It doesn't have any value. And, you know, when I was in preschool, my grandmother, I acknowledged her earlier, is Khananacht. So when somebody's passed away, we put a T on the end of their name. That's how we acknowledge that they've passed on. She was my preschool teacher, and so was my auntie. And my grandma was my first teacher of compassion. Sorry. I have vivid memories of her telling us stories and me looking at her tell the stories, and I was so eager to learn, and she would speak Squamish language, and I was eager to learn. And when I was in grade 3, there was a day I walked into class and we're learning Squamish language, and the teacher asked, "Stamti squaltis," and I looked around and nobody wanted to say anything. And I said, "Stam huyas squaltis," and that meant, she asked, "What's the name of the day today?" And I said, "It's Wednesday." And you know, a lot of people were afraid. So, and it's that intergenerational trauma, right? And I was just like, I can't be the only one who's eager to learn, who can do this. So I'd look to my grandmother and I'd listen to what people said about our elders. And they said they were always kind. And I said, how can my grandma, if I was born knowing all of this, my grandma lived through this. She experienced all these things that I've described to a lot of you. And that was her father that I described being shipped away on a barge. How did she manage to be the nicest person that you could ever meet, the most gentlest soul you could ever meet, knowing all of that, what I just told you? And that is how I learned how to be compassionate and kind, and understanding that I don't have to be afraid to be the only Indigenous person in the room. That I come from her. I come from all my grandmothers and great-grandmothers. I come from that strength. And I'll do my best to leave you with this. If you make a mistake and go over the time limit, have compassion for yourself. If you get up in front of people and say something kind of funny, have compassion for yourself, because people are just admiring you for being brave enough to stand up in front of everyone.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. So, Peter, when you went out, did you have any luck finding where that music is coming from?
No.
It's not just in my head, right? Yeah. I mean, that happens.
And the doors are locked.
And the door's locked, okay.
It's coming from behind you.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Interfaith harmony. It's a really ground zero, in my opinion, for shared wisdom. And I want to thank Tiffany very much for sharing her wisdom with us. And also our mayor. Really enjoyed listening to you. I learned about an important concept from Tiffany. Don't you love the idea of boundaries that overlap? That's beautiful. Thank you. And thanks to the organizers, we need more of this type of space to share. I have every confidence that this will be a very inclusive and enlightening event. So they never give you an easy topic, right? So how do we bring about a sane, compassionate, peaceful world? All in under 7 minutes. So I've given this some thought, and I couldn't come up with any easy answers. But I have some questions. Do you think that a peaceful, compassionate world is more likely to come when we, as humans, become more compassionate, more peaceful? Are we going to have this world as a more peaceful world if our relationships at work, at home, are more loving, more peaceful, more compassionate? Or are we going to have a peaceful world when our orientation to the world, to our natural environment, is more sane, more compassionate? See all these questions? Or are we going to have a more peaceful world, a more compassionate world, when our own approach to life becomes more loving and peaceful and compassionate? Even under the most difficult circumstances in life, that we respond in a compassionate way? Or are we going to wait for our systems of government and institutions, and religious institutions as well, to bring us peace, to act more justly, more inclusively, more democratically? I really don't have answers, as I said, but I really think that the answer to all of the above is yes, 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 yes. It's a resounding yes, and probably more. I want to share with you a short story. My family and I left the country of my birth, Iran, in 1972. And in 1979, I enrolled at the University of Toronto. And at the time, like all other Canadian students, I took my freedoms and right to education, all of its accompanying privileges for granted. That same year, 1979, was the year of the Iranian Revolution, some of you remember. And so you can't blame me for asking myself once in a while, where would I have been had I stayed there? How would my life have unfolded had we not left? One thing I know for sure, and that is that had I stayed there, along with thousands, tens of thousands of other Baha'i youth in Iran, I would have lost my right to education. So, this basically may have been what would have happened. Now, 8 years after 1979, the Baha'i community of Iran organized these a very decentralized program of higher education to meet the needs of people, Baha'i youth who had been banned from school. So this was a very peaceful initiative to meet that need. And with the latest technology they had at the time, we're talking 1987, and the resources, volunteer resources of many, and professors from all around the world, the Baha'i Institute for Higher Education was born. And of course, I want to say something here. Although Baha'is are the largest religious minority in Iran and they are a persecuted population, they're not the only ones who are targeted. The Iranian regime, as you all know, has targeted journalists, human rights advocates, women, many, many others. But here's the key difference. The key difference is the Baha'is have been denied recognition under the constitution of Iran. And what that means is that they really they have no recourse. They have nowhere to go, nowhere to turn to. And that's why this initiative, the BIHE, Baha'i Institute for Higher Education, was so significant. Nonetheless, many attacks came from the Iranian regime, and professors were jailed, faculty members, administrators, equipment, computers, lab equipment was confiscated, and seminars were disrupted. And is that 7 minutes remaining or 7 minutes to go? Remaining? Oh, that's good. All right. Oh, 2 minutes to go? Oh, no. All right. Become passionate. I have to become passionate.
And let go.
I'll try my best here. Okay, so basically this program has grown to 38 university-level programs and is affiliated with about 100 universities around the world. So what that means is that these graduates can now apply to places like Yale, to Harvard, prestigious universities, along with a number of affiliated Canadian universities, and do their PhDs and master's programs. Isn't that wonderful? So I love that example because it has inspired me, because what it tells me is that to build a better world, we really don't need to be combative. We don't need to be adversarial. We don't need to engage in partisan politics. But what we do need is a response that's constructive, that meets a need, to engage in that constructive action and be constructively resilient. And that's something we don't see very often. Most people that arise to make change are fighting against things and eventually we end up with a lot of cynics. I want to refer to something. In 2009, the international governing body of the Baha'is, the Universal House of Justice, wrote to the Baha'is of Iran, and they said this. And remember, this is 2009, after many, many years, of course, of persecution. With an illumined conscience, with a world-embracing vision, with no partisan political agenda, and with due regard for law and order, strive for the regeneration of your country. So, friends, in the face of antagonism, bigotry, divisiveness, polarization, what are we to do? Are we going to fight against what we don't want, or are we going to build something anew? Are we going to let that old skin shed and focus on growing and developing the new skin? I'd say yes. You know what they say, we become what we fight. And unfortunately, that's a very ugly prospect these days. So a peaceful world is going to really require a lot more than legislative action. It's going to require us, people. It's going to require us to develop our capacity for service. It's going to require us to develop our capacity for love, for compassion, for justice, for forgiveness, for empathy, for working together. And I want to also say, do these kind of sound to you like feminine qualities? I'd like to think so. And the Baha'i writings emphasize this point. I want to read this to you. The world in the past has been ruled by force, and man has dominated over woman by reason of his more forceful and aggressive qualities, both of body and mind. But the balance is already shifting. Force is losing its dominance, and mental alertness, intuition, and spiritual qualities of love and service, in which woman is strong, are gaining ascendancy. Hence, the new age will be an age less masculine and more permeated with the feminine ideals. Or to speak more exactly, will be an age in which the masculine and feminine elements of civilization will be more evenly balanced. So, dear friends, in conclusion, I just want to say, let's make that conscious decision about how we want to operate in the world, the values that we want to embrace. Do we want the values of oneness and unity, working together, shoulder to shoulder with people that are different from us? And then, if so, let's roll up our sleeves and work together to build new rather than destroy what's already destroying itself. I think, having you read all the places I've lived, I just want to say that when we do this, we really taste and experience the oneness of humanity, and the oneness of humanity as time has come. Nothing can prevail against an idea whose time has come. Thank you.
I hope I don't need that.
You do.
Do I need it?
Yes.
Sorry. My name is Wayne Codling. My Buddhist name is Sojun Enso. I've been a monk most of my wasted life. There's a sense in which I want to talk to you about Buddhism. Because Buddhism has some pretty nifty kinds of shifts in your point of view that are extremely helpful when you're in situations of effective negotiations with different people, different points of view, different perspectives. But mostly what I want to say to you is the bottom line is about meditation. Meditation, this is one of the Buddhist insights. This is actually a Buddhist thing. You should do, Buddhism would say, you should do everything that you know you need to do. You should do it. You should do it fully and completely and with your whole body and mind. But you should also meditate. Because it's as important to meditate as it is to be true to your wisdom and to be true to your knowledge and your history and your family, your territory, everything. All of these things are all equally important. And that's the part that those of us in European ancestral traditions, I think, are kind of missing. We don't do meditation. We do prayer. We're wise. We know a lot of stuff. We have the same ambitions and so on. But we don't do meditation. Meditation is the venue. Now I'm going to lapse into a little bit of Buddhism. Because the thing that makes all of our knowledge and wisdom go sideways is that we get caught up in elements of greed. We get caught up in moments of ill will or animosity, and we get caught up or caught by various kinds of ignorance. And meditation gives us the opportunity to process all of these factors through our own direct experience. Actually, I don't know how much time I have, but I'd like to ask something of you, or at least suggest something to you. That every single person, as we sit here right now, when you want to, can just bring their attention onto their breath. And breathe in an intentional way, but not in a highly controlled way, just deeper into the body. And stay with the breath. Let your body go very relaxed, but very conscious, and align it with the pull of gravity, and just be present. It's really easy to do. The thing is, you know, I'm actually offering you a really simple solution. I think that it's not that difficult to find a way to envision the future of compassion and sustainability. I think it's actually quite easy, and we all exactly know how to do it. The only thing we don't know is how to marshal our intention so that we could put together more than a microsecond of presence, of being present in our present. Because, you know, we recognize it. When we experience the present moment, we recognize it as something that has integrity. Everything is present. And from that as a base, if you put together, say, I don't know, 250,000 moments of integrity in a short span of time, you might have this open this small window where we can hear the stories of the First Nations people and how they took the brunt of European ignorance and European hatreds and European greed. We've seen all that. So this is what I think Buddhism has to help us in our discussion. It's not going to try to tell you, I'm not here to tell you that you've got to be Buddhist. I don't think so. I don't think we need Buddhism at all. But we need meditation. That's the thing we need. So that's basically what I want to say. Is that a good place to stop?
My name is Reverend Anita Sarup, and I am an ordained minister in the Lutheran Church, in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, and I'm serving an Anglican parish, St. Mary's Anglican, in the Chosen. Now, I am grateful to be asked to speak today. From what I understand, your Christian speaker canceled. So I'm your contingency Christian. Representing all of the Christian church. So, yeah. And so I got the question, what is the teaching from your tradition that helps to guide a vision of a sustainable and compassionate world? Now, that is a question that I'm sure is easily answered, as you can all tell. But it made me think of the question that I'm always asked, and I didn't grow up in the Christian church. I accidentally tripped and fell into the Christian church, I like to tell people. But I do have people ask me, what is a person who grew up, immigrant parents from Trinidad and Tobago, Hindu background, how did you end up in a Lutheran church? And how are you serving an Anglican parish in the Chosen? And the answer to that question made me think of the answer to the question that I was given for this event, this wonderful event. So I was born in Canada. I live mostly in Ontario, and I lived in British Columbia, Prince Rupert. And in both provinces, in the early 80s, late 70s, 90s, I experienced a lot of racism, And it really shaped my view of the world, and it shaped my view of myself. And my parents, like my dad was a practicing Hindu, and he was one of these people that he liked to talk about God with anybody. If you wanted to talk about God, he wanted to talk about God. So if you wanted to invite him to your Baptist church or your Pentecostal church or your whatever, he would accept. He would bring all of us to come to this church, and we would sit in church and learn about different things. And that's when I first heard about Jesus, this Jesus person. So, fast forward, I get accepted to the University of Victoria. I come to UVic, and I'm burdened by racism and all the things that a young 17, 18-year-old person would be burdened with as a student at UVic. And I'm walking through the university center, and there's a table set up, and there's these chaplains, multi-faith, University of Victoria multi-faith chaplaincy. And there's this guy, and he's sitting there, and he has like gray hair and a gray beard. He looked just like God would. Looked like if God were human, I guess. And he said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I am doing really crappy. Thanks for asking." And he said, "Do you want to talk about it?" And I looked at this chaplain, and I thought, "Okay, buddy, let's talk about it." And so I told him all these stories about growing up and the things that I was suffering from. And, you know, I'm sure not unlike anybody at university today. And he said to me, really stroking his beard, really wise, he said, "You know, I think God was with you in your suffering. I think God was with you in your suffering." And I said, "Really, that doesn't sound legit." Because from what I know about Christians is that God helps those that help themselves. And he said, "Yeah, I don't know. I think you might want to rethink that." And so I never saw him again. And I'm sure you can attest to that, right? You talk to people and then you never see them again. Well, I did actually see him again, 10 years later. I have 2 children, little children, and I'm remembering that my dad liked to talk to everybody about God. And I thought, where should I go to talk to people about God? I can't really, maybe a church? I don't know. That might work. And so a friend of mine, I put it out there, and a friend of mine said, "Come with me to my church." And I said, "Sure, I'll come with you to your church, by invitation." So I go to this church. It's Grace Lutheran Church. It's a Lutheran church. I don't know what a Lutheran is at all, but it says Lutheran on the sign. And I walk in, and I see the pastor, and he greets me, and I said, "I know you." And he's like, "Yeah, I know you too." And we think, thrifties? Where did that come from, right? We pinpoint the fact. He's like, "Were you at UVic?" And I said, "Yep, I was at UVic. These years?" "Yep." "I was a chaplain." I said, "I know you. We talked. You told me something really profound. You said that God was with me in my suffering." And so here was this Lutheran chaplain 10 years later. So we started talking. I wanted to talk about God. And he was excited to talk with someone off the street about God. And a year later, I was baptized into the Christian faith. And I learned about baptism. We talked for about a year. We talked about baptism. We talked about what that meant. Because for me, I didn't know what it meant to be baptized. I'd seen things in movies. I'd heard, that you must be baptized in order to avoid hell and eternal damnation. And that is sort of a story that's out there, but it isn't what he told me. He told me that baptism was this invitation. It was an invitation into God's inclusivity. And that word really struck me, inclusivity. This was something that I was striving for, was craving. And so I said, okay, I'd like to get baptized. So that's how I became a Christian. So I decided that I needed to catch up because everybody else was ahead of me and I needed to learn so much. And I guess I got carried away because look at me, I'm a priest now. But there's something about the Lutheran tradition and the theology that really struck me. And a theologian, Kelly Fryer, she kind of summed it up for me. She said that she walked into her classroom one day and she was teaching at a seminary. She drew an arrow pointing down, and she said, "This is all you need to know about the theology, Christian theology." And everybody looked at the arrow and they're like, great. An arrow pointing down, great. Okay. But what she meant to say was that God meets us. God came to us. This is the story of the incarnation, the story of Christmas. God came to us to meet us, right? And so the theology that I subscribe to is that God comes to us. We don't go to God. There isn't anything that we can do or say to win God's favor, and there isn't anything that we can do or say to lose God's favor. Unconditional love. Now, I don't think that you need to be a person that suffers from racism or low self-esteem or whatever to need and to understand unconditional love. Unconditional love is something that we can all relate to or resonate with. So I deepened my understanding. This understanding that God meets us. And I also understood that God meets us, and so we are filled with gratitude about this experience of unconditional love. Because when we understand that, we see the world. Somebody talked about perspective, how we see the world. So I started seeing the world that way, you know. God meets us, and then we are filled with gratitude, and it bubbles out of us, and it goes forward. It goes into all of our relationships, and we see it everywhere. Now, this is something that the Lutherans, the Anglicans, the United, most of the mainline Protestant churches subscribe to, this inclusivity and this unconditional love. Now, another thing about the tradition that I'm from is the Bible. The Bible is a library of books, and it is supposed to be a living word. It's not a static word, it's a living word. It breathes life contextually into the world, and it's supposed to liberate. It's supposed to give life. The Eucharist is a part of my tradition. Communion, bread and wine. And this is a promise of God to meet us in the bread and the wine, and to be with us, to accompany us. Confession and forgiveness, that's another tenet or an ideology that I think is important for compassion. Confession, when we understand ourselves, the places that we name where we've fallen short about our relationship with God and each other. And again, this is supposed to be freeing. And then fellowship too. Fellowship, it's a place of practice. So I believe that faith, a faith tradition, is a practice. And in a church, for me, that's where I get to practice. That's where I get to live hard things. Death, life, joys, sorrows, all these things in community. And this is why I'm a pastor, or a priest, or an incumbent, or whatever language people use to call my vocation. But I think that for me, the title that I would like to always be known as is Beloved. Beloved of God. And I want people to know that the Christian tradition is an ancient and wonderful practice. And it is filled with goodness too. It's my path and my way of compassion in the world. Now, I recently met a person who came to me at my parish and said, I grew up in the Lutheran Church, but, when I came out, I was rejected. And now that I'm transitioning into a different gender, I want to be rebaptized. Can you imagine how much joy it is for me to say to this person, you don't need to be rebaptized because God saw you 100% completely and fully, and you were beloved the very first time, always. You don't need to have a second baptism. One baptism is good enough. You are beloved. And so today, I might have to leave early at 4 o'clock. I will gather with the community and we will do a renaming ceremony and baptismal remembrance. And this person will invite their parents from Winnipeg, their friends and family, and will get to be free to practice his faith in the tradition that he is used to and loves. And it will be a public proclamation that this person was always beloved of God, no matter what. And that's why I think that for me, this faith tradition is something that I feel can bring compassion and love and togetherness for the world.
Our next speaker is Sabine Lair. Our next speaker is Sabine Lair of the Intercultural Association, who will speak briefly on the refugee situation here in Victoria, in which ICA and many other faith communities have been involved. Sabine and I have been on a number of panels together at various conferences.
Thank you very much, Paul, and I will stick with my script, and I promise I won't take more than 4 minutes, so not to make you angry and to deprive people from the break that they need. So, as Paul has said, my name is Sabine Lair. I work here at the Intercultural Association in Victoria, and what I do there is I manage the private sponsorship of refugees program. I'd like to thank the organizers of today's event for giving me a few minutes to address you all this afternoon. We are here to celebrate, among other things, the 70th anniversary of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. At this time in history, there are millions of people around the world who are deprived of their most basic and fundamental human rights, especially the rights to freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear. Article 3 of the Declaration calls for everyone to have the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 9 calls for no one to be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. And Article 13 calls for everyone to have the right to leave their country, including their own, and to return to that country. Unfortunately, there are way too many people in this world who have to resort to Article 14 of the Declaration, which says that everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. If all the other articles of the Declaration were observed, we would not need Article 14. Sadly, we do, and increasingly more so in this world. Currently, there are over 65 million people worldwide who are forcibly displaced. And of those, 22.5 million people had to flee their home country and are living somewhere in a country of asylum. This is the highest level of displacement globally on record with the United Nations Refugee Agency. Many of these refugees cannot return ever to their home country, and staying in the country of asylum is also not an option for many of them. So what this means is that resettlement to a safe third country is their only hope. The UN estimates that 1.2 million people worldwide are in need of resettlement to a third country. This is for this year. And of those, the UN is hoping that they can refer 120,000 people for resettlement. Now that's only 10% of those that are in need. They don't even know, with some of the actions, particularly south of the border, as to whether there will be spaces for these 120,000 people. And even if that comes to pass, the fate of these other 90% is uncertain. And that is where compassion comes into the picture, which is one of our key themes here for today. Since the 1970s and the Indochina crisis, Canadians have shown enormous compassion in helping get refugees to safety through sponsorship. When I say Canadians, I mean all Canadians, including the indigenous populations that have been welcoming these refugees on their ancestral territories. Faith communities have always been at the forefront of these efforts. And after 40 years of doing this work, Canada has a very solid framework for the private sponsorship of refugees, which is now actually receiving attention across the world. I've been myself in various other countries recently talking about what this means, welcoming refugees into community. Private sponsorship of refugees allows each and every one of us to make a difference in a very tangible way in the lives of refugees. And if you're interested to learn more about refugees or about the sponsorship, please come and visit me during the upcoming break outside there in the foyer, or at the end of today's event. I will be there. I also have my business cards there, and if you want to talk to me later on in my office, please feel free to take a card, call me, or email me. Let me just conclude by a very profound thing that I heard one sponsor say, actually in the United Kingdom, that has a new sponsorship program. She was asked in an interview whether sponsorship of one refugee person or one family wasn't simply a drop in the ocean. And her answer to this question was, yes, it is. But isn't the ocean made up of drops? So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking
And growing community. The Chorus is a welcoming place which aims to remove any barriers to participation. It was co-founded and is co-directed by Christine, Sophia, and Gordon Miller. I'm sure I got your name wrong. So please join me in welcoming them.
Our first song for you today, and we're going to do three, is called Sisi ni Moya. It has been intentionally written in what we would describe as a tribal style, but the words Sisi ni Moya are not specifically of any language. It binds us together in the global community, in the global tribe.
We all feel hunger. passion, we all seek joy.
We all bruise.
We all bruise.
We all scar.
We all scar. We all fail to learn to thrive.
We all walk on the old.
Hey,
And we all believe to stay. In the darkness of the night and in the glory of the morning, we walk along the path and find our way.
hey,
Sisini Moya,
hey,
Sisini Moya,
hey,
Sisini Moya, Now we stand here together and lift our hearts in song to the rhythm of this moment in our lives. Hey ya, Sisini Moya. 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 Hey ya, Sisini Moya.
we are one.
Thank you so much. What you're seeing today is a little under about 1/2 of Senior Joy. In this cohort, 16 to 29, we've got jobs to be concerned about, we've got exams to be concerned about, there's lots of things going on in our lives, and getting the whole choir together for a Sunday afternoon was a bit of a tricky business. Part of our mandate for this season was actually to see if the choir could be split into smaller groups. So when we received the invitation to come today, we were just so pleased to bring a portion of the choir out. And I think they're doing quite a fine. The next song is called I Dreamed of Rain. And we should stop dreaming. But what I want you to pay attention to is the way that the poet has mixed up the tense in this song. As they're imagining a better and more beautiful and more perfect place, the tenses are mixed between I dreamed in the past tense and this thing is happening in the present tense. Listen to the way that that is at balance, and it comes back to the closing line every time, and peace spread over the land. A little more piano. A little more piano. Starting note keys as well.
I dreamed of rain and the rains came, soft and easy, sweet and clear. I dreamed of rain and the rains came, and peace spread over the land. I dreamed of summer and the winds changed, and the green was easy and the rivers ran clear. I
this season was to be off book, to have much of our music memorized, so that when we told our story, we could tell it with not just the words and the sound, but also our faces and our bodies, and interact with our audience. So it's been an exciting new experience for us. By the time we reach our concert on March 23rd at the Dave Dunnett Auditorium in Oak Bay at 7 p.m. Tickets are on sale through our Facebook page and our website. We will have probably 7 or 8 of our 15-song repertoire off book, and we're looking forward to putting on quite a show for you. Thanks for having us today. We've really enjoyed our part in the program, and this song is called Make Them Hear You.
Justice was our battle and how justice was denied. Make them hear you, make them hear you. And say to those who blame us for the way we chose to fight, that sometimes there are battles which are more than black or white. And I could not put down my sword when justice was my right. Make them hear you, make them hear you. Go out and tell a story to your daughters and your sons. Make them hear you, make them hear you. And tell them in our struggles we were not the only ones. Make them hear you, make them hear you. Your sword can be a sermon or the power of the pen. Teach every child to raise his voice and then my brothers bend. Will justice be demanded by 10 million righteous men? Make them hear you. When they hear you, I'll be near you
All right, everybody, thanks for sticking around. So the second panel is invited to speak again for about 7 minutes each. We've had some conversations, I'm just going to say. Good word. And the question is the same as the first panel, which is what teachings from your tradition can help to guide our vision of a sustainable and compassionate world. Our first speaker will be Rabbi Louis Sutker, who is a retired psychologist who delights in teaching and learning, creating liturgy, and working with all spiritual traditions. He's also a former fellow of the Center for Studies in Religion and Society. He is a former member of the board of the Victorian Multi-Faith Society and functions as an interim rabbi at a number of locations in Canada and abroad. The second speaker will be Imam Ismail Mohammed Noor, who is a Muslim panelist. He's the Imam of the Masjid Al-Iman Mosque in Victoria, which first opened its doors in 2012. He was born in Somalia, grew up in Sweden and the United Kingdom. Mohammed Noor is the Imam for a community of about 2,500 Sunni Muslims in the Victoria area, and he's also active in interfaith and refugee work. The third speaker will be Parminder Kaur Vert from the Sikh community. Parminder is very much involved in the Sikh community. She has an MA and an MPhil in theology from India and taught Punjabi at the Sikh temple here in Victoria for 20 years. Parminder currently works as a coordinator and recovery coach in the mental health field. And the final panelist is from the Unitarian community, Reverend Shanna Lingood. Shanna grew up near Philadelphia as a member of the, what? Go Eagles. So that's okay, wait. Is that football? Okay. That apparently is that that's one of the teams in the thing today? Okay. I know. Yeah. I'm going to get kicked out of some club. So Shanna grew up near a place where football is played. A member of the Unitarian community and came in 2010 to serve as co-minister of the First Unitarian Church in Victoria with her spouse, the Reverend Melora Lingood. She is committed to helping people find meaning and beauty in life. So please join me in welcoming First Rabbi Louis Tucker.
Thank you. I am alive. I am alive. I'm alive. And who is this alive that I am? And who is this alive that I am? And who is this alive that I am? Is it not the Holy Blessed One? So, just to give you a little bit of background, the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, the centerpiece of it is called the Torah, otherwise known as the Chumash, which stands for 5. It's the 5 books of Moses, and that's the basics. And it's divided into basically 54 chapters. You know, I was going to do a little bit from each one, but given the time constraints, I don't think we'll do that. So we read one of those chapters each week of the year, and sometimes we read 2 because 52. Yeah. So anyway, so I thought this week we're in the book of Mishpatim, which means laws, and I'm going to read just a couple of things from that very selectively. Don't afflict a widow or a fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, they will cry out to me, and I will surely hear their cry. If you take somebody's garment as a pledge, restore it to them, and when the sun goes down, but that's their only garment. This one is the one that really resonates to me because it's so difficult. If you meet any of your enemies' animals or herd, like their donkey wandering around, you shall surely restore it to them again. This is your enemy, somebody who's trying possibly to kill you, and you are obligated to return their animals to them, and actually, if they're burdened, to help them up if they fall down. Keep far from a false thing. Don't oppress a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And sustainability, every 7th year the land is supposed to lie fallow. So this is obviously a very selective group. We can find some things in the Torah. Torah, by the way, does not mean law like it has been described. It means teaching. And so the whole idea of our Torah is to teach us how to lead our lives, to teach us what to do, and to teach us what not to do. So we greet each other, we say, Shalom Aleichem. Okay? Assalamu Alaikum. Okay? It's a plural. Shalom, we heard before, means peace. But that does not actually convey the meaning of shalom. Because the meaning of shalom, like salam, means wholeness. It means completion. So the sense is that there cannot be any peace without it working for everybody. Well, you can have a cold peace, okay, which is a very delicate kind of a peace, but you can't have true peace unless this is there. So we're talking about sustainability, and we're talking about compassion. And in the mystical tradition of our people, God originally took away a microphone speaking and had that person try to put it back together again. But they don't need to, because I have a stentorian voice, right? You can all hear me? Not a problem? Okay. Sorry, thank you very much. That's why he's a professor. And I actually taught at UVic 74 to 78 as a lowly assistant professor. I'm sorry, the shame is so deep. But there you go. So God originally created the world only according to the laws of strict justice. Okay, din, justice. But soon saw that the world could not actually be sustained, and so created the notion of chesed, of loving kindness also. Okay? And what we have, what we would call compassion in our tradition, is the combination of loving kindness, chesed, and strict justice, din. When they are together in balance, then that's compassion, or in Hebrew, that's rachamim. Shoshana had us say that word earlier. Now, the other interesting thing about the word rachamim is very important as we're talking about it, is that it resonates to the Hebrew word rechem. And that is the word for womb. Okay, so we heard some talk earlier about how many of these attributes of love, of sweetness, of caring about each other resonates in many ways to the feminine. Now, I don't want to stereotype feminine either. We know that women are very capable of doing some of the horrible things that men are capable of doing. But it does suggest that there is something particular about this notion of compassion, of feeling together, and that it has something to do in a very original kind of way of coming through the feminine qualities. So I'll leave you with the words of shalom, which our main prayers end with that word shalom. And the priestly blessing is an example of that. Okay? So I'll leave you with that. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and watch over you. Yo'er Adonai panav alecha v'chuneka. May God's face shine on you and grant you favor. Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's face turn towards you and grant all of you, all of us, all of the world, shalom, wholeness, and peace. Thank you.
I want to begin by thanking everyone for giving me this opportunity. I've been here in Victoria for close to, I think it's more than 2 years now. And I still remember when I first came to Victoria and I gave my first sermon at the mosque. And I've mentioned this story before, but I'll mention it again because it's one that really taught me a lot of things. After giving my first sermon here in Victoria at the mosque, one of the members came up to me and he said, Imam, I really love your speech. It was so wonderful. And it made me feel very happy and joyful. So I asked him, I said, which part of my speech did you really like? And he started looking around and he scratched his head and he said, well, I really liked how short your speech was. I told him I'll take that. So, having said that, I'll try to keep my speech or this short introduction or speech, I guess, short. So, Islam, believe it or not, contrary to popular belief, it is not a religion that calls for the death of the infidel, right? It is what has been portrayed in media as such. Even the word Islam means peace. it comes with the message of peace. Not only that, but in Islam we're taught that God Himself has 99 names that are known to us. And one of those names is actually As-Salam, meaning the one that originates peace, the one that grants peace, the one that peace turns back to. So that is just one of the fundamental teachings in the religion. Islam as a religion came to safeguard 5 main principles. These are the foundations of life as we know it, and Islam came to protect these 5 things. The first point that is amongst these 5 is Islam came to protect religious freedom. Now, again, based upon what you might have heard in media, you might think that is a contradiction. But if you go back to the scriptures, you will actually find verses that tells us La ikraha fid din, that there is no compulsion when it comes to faith. No one can be forced to believe in what they do not want to believe in. And even in Islamic history, if you look back into the history, you'll notice that the early societies where Muslims lived, they shared their cities with people of other faiths. So in Medina, the city of the Prophet, peace be upon him, you had the Prophet living alongside Jewish people. And not only that, there wasn't just a tolerance, but later on in life, as history tells us, when the Muslims reached Jerusalem and they settled there in the year 637, they actually called, once they had Jerusalem as part of the Muslim, as a province, they called on the Jewish people who had been expelled from the city. And they called them back to Jerusalem in order for them to settle back there. So this is what Islam teaches us, that there is more than just tolerance. There is more than just acceptance. You need to be able to take that next step. And along with that, the second point is the sanctity of life. Islam teaches us that every single life is or has sanctity. There's a beautiful story of a man who happened to pass away, and there was the funeral, concession. People were taking the body to the grave, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, stood up and showed that man respect. Right? And the companions, they nudged the Prophet, and they said, "Oh Prophet, this man was a Jew. This man was a Jew. He didn't believe in your message." And the Prophet turned to his companions and he said to them, "Was he not a human being? Was he not a soul?" So again, it teaches us how to deal with people, even if you do not see eye to eye. Another aspect, the third pillar, is safety of wealth. Islam teaches us that people's properties, their livelihoods, their homes, anything that belongs to them has that sanctity as well. You are not allowed to take anything from anyone else without their consent. The fourth point is Islam is there to protect the intellect of people. If you look into Islamic history, you will see that the first university that was established in the world was established by a woman. It was established in the 9th century. It was established in Morocco, right? So again, this shows us that Islam gives importance to knowledge and seeking knowledge and intellect. And that leads me to my final point. And I know I said I wouldn't make it too long, but This is the final point. Islam, just give me a second. This is why I don't like technology. And Islam comes to protect family and heritage, right? It acknowledges that people are diverse. There are many verses in the Quran, in the Holy Book, that affirms this. And one is not expected to forget where they come from, who they are, and their rich culture and history. And the reason, as a final point, the reason why I'm sharing this with you is I firmly believe that if everyone goes back into their own traditions, into their own scriptures, and what they hold to be value, they will see the same message in their teachings. So I think the way forward is for all of us to really take a deep look, to reflect on our own teachings, the things that we hold to be truth. And with that, I hope that it will give a bright future for all of us. Thank you so much for this great opportunity.
Say thank you to everyone to make special time where we can share our ideas with everyone, and thank you, Paul, for special time also. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Parminder Garg. The Holy Book of Sikh religion, Guru Granth Sahib Ji, gives us clear guidelines about sustainable and compassionate word. The very first line of our holy book is Ek Onkar Satnam Karta Purkh. It means one God is the creator of the universe. God lives in everyone. Therefore, Sikhs believes that visible form of God is nature or environment itself. Pavan Guru Pani Pita Mata Tat Mahat. That means air is the Guru, water is the Father, and earth is the great mother of all. Natural resources like water, earth, and air are sacred, and therefore should be respected. Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji says that purpose of human being is to be in harmony with all creation, and all the human domination needed to be rejected. The earth is referred to us as a mother, as such require our respect. Great care need to be taken to ensure that no damage occur to the when we use in daily life. Ek Pita, Ekis Ke Hum Balik. God is a father of all. We are all his children. He made everyone equal. How can someone be better than others? It is the circumstances, the system who made someone better than others. Our holy book, Guru Granth Sahib, teaches us to treat everyone equal, men and women beyond their color, creed, and ethnic background. 500 years ago, back, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, our first Guru, spoke for the rights for women. He said, "So kya manda akhiye jit jame razan." It means a woman who gave birth to kings and emperors. How can she be weaker than man? We need to respect women and treat them equally. Sati Pratha. Sati Pratha ritual was very sad in India. Sati Pratha means when husband died, women asked to sit beside dead husband in funeral parade and burned alive. It was in hope to go heaven and live with husband. Showing compassion to women, our Guruji started widow marriage to women can have normal life again and live in society with respect and dignity. Guruji criticized Sati Pratha so strongly. Guruji asked the follower to have a simple vegetarian diet and have a simple way of life. The Sikh don't eat meat. They think it is a cruelty to animal. There it is in the interest to everybody that no harm is done to anything in the universe because of the Sikhs prefer a vegetarian diet. Every Sikh temple has a community kitchen and it is open to everyone. The main worship place of Sikh religion is Golden Temple in Amritsar in India. It has 4 doors to welcome everyone and it has largest community kitchen in the world. If there is a natural disaster like flood, earthquake and war, Sikh temples provided food, clothes and shelters. They work like a Red Cross in the olden days and present days. Guru also advised us to stay away from smoke, alcohol and other intoxicants. These things harm our mind, health, people around us and society and environment. Compassion. Compassion is most important equality for Sikh. The devotee of the Sikh Gurus must keep compassion at the forefront of his or her mind. At this virtues must accompany the Sikh at all times. Beside compassion, there's other 4 virtues are truth, contentment, humility and love. Nirdaya nahi jot ajala, bhutat bhute sarv jajala. You have no compassion, the world's light does not shine on you. The Lord's light does not shine in you. You are drowned in worldly entanglements. It is clear from the lines that if you do not have compassion, then you will not be blessed by Lord. You will not achieve any progress in your spiritual development and you will drown in materialistic things. It is mandatory to not ignore tragedy that take place in the world, but to face them head on and do whatever is possible within your means. As Sikh, you must feel the pain and suffering of other people involved in any tragedy. The Sikh, they do prayers twice a day. In the prayer, they say Sarbat da Pala. It means prosperity and peace for everything in the world. This everything includes all the living and non-living as well as visible and invisible things in the universe. Our holy book advises us to stay away from the 5 things. Their evils: Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Hankar, means lust, anger, greed, attachment, ego. 5 evils make you suffer in your life. Guruji stay in praise of God, creation. Gagan mein thal, Ravchand Dipak bane, Tarka Mandal Jank Moti. Upon that cosmic plate of the sky, the sun and moon are the lamps. The stars are the studded pearls. Topmalyamno pavan chavro kare, sakal banare, flant jyoti. The fragrance of sandalwood in the air, in the temple, incense. And the wind is the fan. All the plants of the world are the flowers in offering to you, O my Lord. Finally, I would like to say that if we follow Guru Granth Sahib Ji's teaching, we can live a better world for our future generations. We can take care of our earth and not to pollute, burn or destroy it. We believe that sacred relationship between human and environment is a necessity for the health of our planet and for our survival. Also, we can have a world full of love, compassion and justice for all. We all can live with respect and dignity.
Thank you.
It's always hard to be last, but I'll try to be energetic in my 5 minutes. So in our faith tradition in Unitarian Universalism, there are really two things that occur to me that address this question of sustainability and compassion. The first is our seventh principle. Our tradition is guided by 7 principles or values that we all share. The seventh principle is respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. And not only is the respect piece of that important, but the fact that we are just one part, one tiny part of a massive web of life, of all beings, not just human beings, but of all beings. The second thing from our tradition, second teaching from our tradition that occurred to me as I thought about this question was a sermon delivered in 1832 by a man by the name of William Ellery Channing, who was one of the kind of forefathers of Unitarianism. And he said in the sermon in Boston, "I am a living member of the great family of all souls." And he went on in the sermon to say, I cannot do anything really in my life. Who I am, what I think, what I do, how I act in the world moves out from me in ever-expanding circles of influence. So that there's nothing that I can do that doesn't have an impact in some way, some shape, some form on other people around me, my community, ultimately the world. So it matters what we do with our lives, the forefathers and foremothers of Unitarian Universalism would tell us. So compassion and sustainability go hand in hand, it seems to me. We cannot sustain if we don't care. If I don't care about you, if I don't care about the earth, if I don't care about my relationships, I can't sustain anything. And sustainable is a word that really, I think, we sometimes diminish, because I think in its fullness, sustainability means a lot of things, right? I'm sustained by the earth, by the air, the water, the air, the food. I'm sustained by relationships, in knowing you, and someone said, one of the speakers earlier, that we know who we are by our reflection in one another's eyes, and we see how we hurt others, how we misstep, and we see how we can do better by seeing how we're reflected in those around us. So it matters how we live and how we treat other people. So if I'm a living member, just a living member, as not an ancestral member, but a living member of the great family of all souls, then it matters that I care about the other souls around me. It matters that I want to try to create a world that lets all people flourish, not just kind of get by, but actually flourish and thrive. And I will have to choose very carefully if I think that I am a member of the family of all souls, how I live my life, because I know that what I do impacts others. So compassion and sustainability really come from our ability to see that what we do matters, how we relate to one another matters, and that this earth that we all share isn't ours. We don't own it. It's not ours. It's ours to share. And so that sense of sharing this planet is also a key piece of it. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. So now we have an opportunity, maybe 25 minutes or so, to have some conversation with the panelists from the audience. Who has a question they would like the panelists to sort of tease out a bit more? Yeah, please. There should be another. One other.
Okay. I did my best once I realized that I went over my time to just stop. But I didn't get a chance to share any teaching, so I just wanted to share. I'll limit myself to 3 just so people can ask questions. So one of the teachings that we have is Ait Shquelequins. Can you guys say Ait? Shquelequins. So Ait means good. And Shquelequins, it breaks down to basically your inner voice. Quail means to talk. A quins means inside, so inner voice. And in our culture, we do not see thoughts and feelings as separate. And there's one elder who said, when he would talk about his mind, he'd touch his heart. And that means we do everything with good thoughts and good feelings. So when I was coming here to speak, I was praying that I could say the right things, and we're taught to always speak from our heart, basically, speak from aici eloquens. But a daily practice or a practical practice of like the way we practice that is when you're cooking. I was always told this: when you're cooking, you have to always have aici eloquens, because if you don't, then you're basically poisoning the food. You're feeding all that negativity into people. So, even if grief, if you're in grief, you weren't expected to need to cook. So another teaching is to always hold each other up. So I'm going to ask you to hold your hands up like that. So you see Coach Salish people do that, and we say, "Hi, Scott." Hi, Scott. And when we start speaking, usually we say, "Asiem," and that is Siem means like respected person. So we assume that the people we're addressing are respectable people, but like holding each other up, so that like not cooking while in grief or something. If a family just had a loss, we would take care of them and we would feed them. And if my family had a loss, people would take care of me and my family. And that's what we would do. There's always this expectation that you should be able to take care of one another. And then even if you ended up being what we would call poor, because poor to us would mean if you don't have family, because you need family to be able to go out and harvest like fish and berries and all that kind of stuff. If you didn't have family for some reason, where you could go for that holding you up, hopefully the community does, but we do believe like nobody really owes you anything, that you don't, you're not entitled to anything, so you better be able to take care of yourself and get help where you can. So if you end up being in a situation where you're poor, you could always rely on the land to help you purify yourself, give you that nurturing and support that you need. Be it through food, but also that love. So basically, I think the only situation that you might not have family is if you lost basically your parents. And if you don't have your parents, you don't have that nurturing place to go. So that's why we'd go to the land. And anytime that we're in a place of immense grief or struggle, that's where we go, is to the land. And I just want to share that.
Thank you very much. There's a question here.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to all the speakers and the organizer. I have a question, maybe double question here for Reverend Anita. Is that the correct one? Thank you for the presentation, very enlightening. The question I have is, question A, what deity in Hinduism your parents follow? Did you carry with it? So Durga or Krishna or whatever it is. That's a question one. Question two, about your feeling being discriminated. Did it come because of the different religion, or did it come because you were color, creed, or you were new immigrant?
Did everyone hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
The first question I would have to say, on Christmas Eve I preached a sermon about how my father was reluctant to celebrate Christmas with us. And us growing up in Canada, we wanted to celebrate Christmas like the rest of the Canadians. And my mom, trying to coach him to, come on, let's celebrate Christmas. And he said, no, we're Hindus. Christmas is for the Christians. And so he reluctantly, we got a tree, we put it up, and he's in the kitchen and he took a tinfoil plate, and he made out of glitter and some things an om to put on top of the tree, which was his, silent resistance. So,
what deity did he follow? Don't know?
I don't know. He was Arya Smash. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And then the second question, I would have to say color, skin color. Yeah, for sure. And it was very complicated in Prince Rupert because many different sort of groups of people, cultures, and religions, but we were the only Trinidadian family, so we didn't quite fit in. So it was a whole mix of complex situations.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Trinidadians in Prince Rupert, oh my goodness.
Just a question I have for any of you who wish to respond. The idea of how to respond to violence in any way without resorting to violence yourself. That's a big question. I mean, Gandhi considered it, Martin Luther King considered it. What do you say about that?
Okay, Wayne, be curious to get your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Well, the question was how to respond to violence. Well, okay. You know, if you're living in a situation where you anticipate violence, you know, for example, if you're female and walking home at 2 a.m, I would suggest that you carry a walking stick. And this is a way to encounter violence that has not yet arisen. But we know from our experience that it might. Other kinds of violence, violence of body or violence of speech, you know, as a Buddhist, you meet it as with as much equanimity as you can, because very frequently equanimity cancels out the energy of violence, and it's a very effective way. It isn't 100%, but it's pretty effective most of the time. And these, again, I would suggest to you, as I'm going to sound like a broken record, but these are meditation skills. This is what you do, is what you bring into being. You know, the word for meditation in Sanskrit is bhavana, and that word means bring into being. So in meditation, that's what you do.
Can we respond to the same?
Yeah, sure. Louis? And then another question.
Yeah, I just want to say it really briefly. Find that place within where you don't deserve to be subjected to violence, and then that's where you get your answers.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to oversimplify the answers to this. I think it's a very difficult kind of a question to answer from my point of view, and I think from my spiritual past point of view in a simple kind of way. We have a right to defend and protect ourselves when someone is threatening us. If possible, we try equanimity, we try relating, we try finding a way to do this, and there have been times certainly when I've been able to talk myself out of responding to a violent attempt by violence also. On the other hand, we have stories of communities who were entirely nonviolent, and if they get invaded, they get wiped out. It's not, I'm just trying to say, I don't think there's easy answers to that particular question. I want to make a distinction between conflict and violence, however. Sometimes that gets confused. There's a huge difference if I'm conflicted with somebody or we have difference of opinions, and they can be very, very strong ones and people can get in your face, so to speak. But as long as there's that inch or half an inch of difference and you're not being actually attacked, your options are still to maintain nonviolence. I have ultimate respect for those people who, in the face of real violence, in the face of being slaughtered, killed, and tortured, were able to maintain a non-violent approach. And that tends to be true to some degree on a collective and on an individual level. But within my tradition, you have a right to defend yourself if you are being physically attacked. So that's all.
In our Sikh religion, it's a mitat nivi nanka gunchingiyaya tat. You always kill your ego and be sweet and calm, and then you say like no to somebody violent to you. It can be a verbally, it can be a physically, it can be violence can be under any circumstances. So if you stay calm and avoid that situation where you are, and keep yourself, stay away from ego, lust, anger, and calm, and then meditate yourself, and then you'll stay away from that kind of circumstances.
I'm present to the common threads of the sacred that I've experienced with each of you this afternoon, and I acknowledge that with deep respect. And I'm very, and one of you mentioned, and what I present is that I sense a shared intention in what each of you are contributing to the whole. And my question is, how do we marshal that intention in the secular world, in the world of politics, economics, environment, in a way that has those deep-seated, what occur for me as universal values, be the defining foundation on which we move forward into the future? And either any or all of you.
People a chance to speak who haven't spoken yet. Shut up.
Leave it to one of my congregants to do that. Yeah, you know, I really, days like this, I think, is it really that hard? Right? Like, to respect other people, to respect the fact that you don't have to, you know, we were talking about Dr. King, you know, I just feel like there's so much, the depth of ability to see with compassion and say, I don't have to agree with you about everything, to respect you, to see that there are common threads of belief and values that we all share, and that's not that the differences aren't also important. I think that's what's part of what's tricky in our society right now, I think, is that we either go all in on like, everybody's the same, or we go all in on everybody is so different they'll never ever get along. And it's like, wait a minute, there is at least one third path there, which is that we are all different and therefore have something to contribute to the whole that not everybody else, you know, I need each of these people to help me see the whole and to help me see myself better, to see where my biases and my blind spots and my lack of clarity are. And yet I really do think, like, is it that hard for economics and politics to say people, the Imam spoke about the sanctity of our lives. Is it that hard to think that all life has value and meaning and purpose, and to act accordingly and to set up systems that lead to that kind of thriving for all people? It just seems like it shouldn't be that hard, but I guess human history says otherwise.
We've heard so much about compassion, love, but I don't understand, or sometimes I think that when you say defend, sometimes it's an aggressive defense. That's what I see. And also what I don't understand is like the brothers, Sunnis and Shiites, are fighting to death. And Palestinian and Jewish are also fighting to death. So what I can see is that people think that love is just one entity. Without respect, you don't love. So, and also, I want to repeat that defense is sometimes construed as an aggressive approach.
I think it's a very good question, and whenever I go in front of people and I speak about Islam and Islamic teachings, I always get a lot of follow-up questions, and they always tell me, they say, Imam, you speak very well, but why is the world the way it is? You say Islam stands for peace. You say Islam stands for understanding, for love, and so on. But I just heard on the news something that happened in Saudi Arabia, or in Afghanistan, women are not allowed to, they're not allowed to have an education, for example. My answer is usually the same. I think sometimes it's wrong to hold one individual responsible for what happens in other places of the world. And at the same time, I think it's people who take religion seriously, they see it as an important part of their life. It is upon us to take back the narrative. Today, people, when they think of religion, they think of obstacles, they think of rules, they think of regulation. You're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, and so on. But the reality is, if you look at the scriptures and you look at the teachings of the major religions in the world, they all preach a similar message. Religion is there to make human beings the best human beings they possibly can be, right? And I just feel that somewhere along, the time and history, that has been changed. So much so that a lot of people, if you were to strike up a religious conversation with them, they'll be offended, or it becomes almost like a burden. And obviously everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and you can't force religion upon anyone. But it's just sad to see that religion has become that for many people. And if we were to all go back to our teachings, to the source, and see what does these great religions really teach and preach, then I think that you would see a very different reality. And that's just my view.
I just have a question based on what Lisa Helps talked about in terms of public space. So I really want to thank everybody. This has been incredible to come up here at the university and hear everybody speak. And I'm trying to ask, I guess, how can we bring all of you folks to the downtown to be in public space and show the community what we're talking about here? This is pretty much out of the downtown. It'd be nice if we could be in public space so people can see us all hanging out together, sharing food together. And this is based on the fact that on Saturday mornings, the Soldiers of Odin, a very racist group, they go out and hand out sandwiches to the homeless downtown. And they've come up with a new saying, don't take sandwiches from strangers, because of this group. So we're not there. So I'd just like to ask us to maybe consider how can we get all of us in the public space together more downtown.
Partly, I think we're stuck that the positive efforts that was happening downtown and in other parts of the city are not well publicized. There's an incredible amount of positive effort going in from any number, from almost all of the different spiritual traditions downtown. And not only that, it's true that it's also happening in places where there's a great deal of violence and conflict. But that's not so newsworthy. What makes the news tends to be is the differences in the conflicts. I mean, look around this room. 50 years ago, would this have been predicted? The variety of us sitting together and talking, to each other and loving each other in many ways. We're very fortunate. I think we tend to, a lot of what we're doing is trying to build a future, and I think it's unrealistic to think that everything that one day everything is just going to be beautiful, we're going to love one another and everything. I cannot see personally a day where there is not conflict, when there is not potential disagreement that could escalate into violence. But those of us here have another approach to life. And Canada actually does. But somehow or another, think about it. Think about what's happened now. Who are allies? We bombed Japan. We're now allies. We terribly bombed Germany in order to win that particular battle. We're now allies. Many of us here have experienced hate, prejudice, rejection in many different ways, but here we are. So I think that's where it starts, and I think that's a very good idea, that we embody this and do something in the downtown. And that's not necessarily going to convince the people from Odin to do anything differently. Some of them maybe yes, some of them maybe no. They are human beings also. And our tendency is, in response to those kinds of Nazi-like kinds of things, is to use exactly these terms and to dehumanize them. And that's what I personally need to guard against more than anything. And I think many of us do. I don't know if anyone else has got that.
We have a chance for one last question.
I've heard themes today of compassion, reconstruction, meditation, beloved, balance, freedom, harmony, and caring. I study ecology here at the university, and so these are themes that I work with every day. How do we reintegrate into our sense of space? How do we love and care enough to prevent catastrophe? Because the future I'm facing is one that is catastrophic. And I need to make people hear us. I need to take back the narrative. I need to know that we will care enough to change. But a lot of faith traditions are not getting the membership of especially young people, but in general. How can your messages in your faith tradition speak to people you aren't reaching?
Wow.
That's an easy one.
So can I ask everyone to answer that in under a minute?
Under a minute. I can tell you with my own spiritual tradition, there's a whole movement called eco-kashrut. So that not only is something to be technically kosher according to the kind of laws that we have, but that it be also ecologically valid, and this is a big growing movement.
Martin Luther said once, if the world were to end tomorrow, today I would plant a tree. And that's the type of hope that we live into.
In our religion, we try to, you're very right, our young people, they are going far away from us. I think it's one reason, about my own personal experience, I taught 20 years to youth. There is only one way we can get them involved. First, they have social connection to each other. We are all, even young or adult, we are far away from isolating from each other. If we create any socializing groups where we can talk about outside the religious places, it's important, the religious places, very important, but get them involved first to create a group, and then where we can teach them about our values and principles, and then go from there to keep them alive, our traditions. Thank you.
I think that the values are good. The values are there. The values in our faith communities are there. I've never lived in a place as secular as British Columbia. And I think that the way the message is correct and the way that we're being messengers is like 20th century at least. So we have to be better messengers of a very wonderful message.
the best way I can say this, I'm my own religion, so I don't belong to a faith, and I do land restoration work, so I go out and do what's important to me. And I come and speak to places like this, and people see me and hear me and what I'm talking about, what I'm passionate about, and that's how I reach other people. And what I do for myself and how to keep all the things that you mentioned is to be in flow with my own energy and trust that that's going to bring back the spirit of this land, which is wetlands. That's all I can say.
I really want to thank you for that question. Very enlightening. I really think that when you ask how do we attract people that we're not attracting, religions in general, I think of religion as far greater than congregation. To me, religion is really an orientation to life that's supposed to bring people together. And if it's not doing that, it's not really true religion. So when I think of it as being greater than a congregation, what it tells me in action is I need to listen more. I need to hear what people that have very different worldviews and paradigms than mine are, and to reach decisions mutually, consultatively, together with people. And the second point is really religious truth is not absolute. I believe religious truth is relative. And that, I'll just stop there because that's a whole other, it opens up a whole other, and I don't have time. And I think that's a very important point there. Thank you.
I don't know. Having said that, it's more important to be kind than it is to be right. I knew a Tibetan Lama here in Victoria a few years ago. He's died. And he used to go downtown near the McDonald's. I'm not sure if it's still a McDonald's, but on Douglas there. And he would just wander around all day. And he had a pocket full of loonies. And he would give some if somebody asked. They didn't have to ask him in words, but they had to ask some way. So one of the things that Buddhism would suggest and Zen practice would suggest is that you go downtown and you offer the opportunity to ask something, and then you give it. And that's the seed.
Well, I guess if I knew, I'd be able to reach those people. But I'll say this, and this is something that we all share. There's a verse in the Quran, the Muslim holy book, that says, "Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim." That Allah, God, does not change the state of a people until they change themselves. So literally it means that we all need to be, we need to take this issue as a personal issue. If we leave it to, the rabbis, the priests, the imams, then not much is going to get done. But if we all take it upon ourselves and we think that, this is a personal issue, how can I make a change? Then I think we'll see the change that we want to see.
That question provoked a lot of really profound reflections from you guys. I really appreciate that. It seems to me that one of the questions that many people do ask when they study religion is how do we get people back into insert group here, church, congregation, synagogue, shul, whatever it might be. The other thing to think about, though, is the history of interfaith dialogue, which really reached its peak kind of in the 70s and 80s, when the principal issue was perceived to be simply ignorance. I don't know why she wears that thing in her head. I don't know why he doesn't want to work on this day. I don't know why he has this or that dietary practice. And that was a big challenge. That was sort of, I would say, the first phase of it. And which kind of died out for a little while. It seems to me that the principal challenge now is not ignorance, it's relationship. Right? It is breaking out of our isolation, our echo chambers, and coming into as many spaces as possible, downtown, on campus, wherever it might be, to try to know one another face to face and to build those kind of relationships that we've heard spoken about. So thank you very much for giving us yet another opportunity to do that and to share with yourselves with us. I really appreciate that. So please join me in thanking the panelists.